Alrighty, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us. I know that, as I mentioned in my email, that performance tasks and SBAC are still on the table for all of us. And so while there's a lot to get through, I hope that our time together today helps at least better communicate what is the expectation for performance tasks, what they entail, and things that we can do, as I'll dub today instead of someday, to better prepare our students for success with regards to the performance tasks. So my name is Gabriel Ward, for those of you that may not know, and I am the math TOSTA for our district. So thank you again for taking the time. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Of course, we are doing math, so I see that I have a problem here, just real fast. It's super simple in terms of not expecting you to share elaborate answers, but just two sides, and I'm asking that you take a moment to make sense of it first. And then my question to you is, how are these two sides, so we have something on the right and something over here on the left, how are these two sides the same and or how are they different? So same or different, and because we have a small group, if you want to just unmute whenever you're ready, or if you feel more comfortable putting in the chat, we won't take too much time, but of course it's a math workshop or a math session, we got to do some math. And thank you for being brave and giving it a go. Again, how are these the same, or are they the same, or how are they different, or are they different? Or if you think they're both, just tell me why you believe that they're either the same or different. Now, if I was in a classroom doing this with kids, which I've done these activities or routines with students, some of them might right away jump out and say, well, there's colors on one and there's not colors on the other. Acceptable answer in terms of those being different. Someone else might say, well, it looks like there are equal signs on one side and there aren't equal sides on the other side. Okay, well, what else? Some students might say, well, it looks like they're showing a picture for the one that happened to have 4 1/6 and 2 3/4 with the representations. Some kids might say there's a model there. So again, these are all things that students might talk about. These are what we call low floor, high ceiling tasks, and they are geared to be able to give access to all of our students. So just a way for us to be able to kind of immerse students in the math conversation, because sometimes kiddos and even teachers are so afraid as adults to get things wrong. And it's not necessarily focused on what your answer is, just kind of what you're seeing as the same or different. So a lot of open areas that you could potentially go. Won't labor on that too much, but the next one, I hope that we actually are able to draw some conversations out, and that's to say we're looking at it, which one doesn't belong. So I'll try to move so that you can kind of see more so what that says, but essentially we have 4 different words here, and they're all related to CAASP. And my question here is, which of these 4 items does not belong with the remaining others? So again, which one does not belong? And then of course, we're always looking in math for justification. So we're looking for that why. So go ahead and take a look. We have 4 different things, A, B, C, D. And I'm going to ask you to think about which one of those 4, and maybe you might say it's all, but we're asking for one that doesn't go with the rest, and then have the reason for why. So I'll give you a chance to make sense, to kind of figure out. And you may be wondering yourself, I don't know what all of those are yet, and that's okay. Hopefully after today's session, we'll have a better understanding of what those 4 components are. So if you feel more comfortable putting in the chat, by all means, but if you want to just unmute and just share what you think.
Gabriel, I think training tests don't fit.
All right, as to why, what was your rationale? Why do you believe training tests are the odd one out?
Well, the performance task and computer adaptive is what they're going to be doing. The practice test is practicing it all, but the training test is just getting them familiar with the SBAC itself.
Love it. Thank you for sharing your rationale. And so that's one of the big things in math, if you're not already doing, is just increasing the opportunities for students to expand on their answer. So if it were me and I was with my students and they just said the answer is A or the answer is B or whatever, I would always go back to, that's fine, but why do you think that is the answer? You have to be able to give me justification. And that is a component of students' performance on the SBAC. So if you're not already doing that, I would urge you to do more of that. So I see someone else is saying A. And performance task, and this is something else in terms of a twist on this routine that I really love, is to say, you may not have said A. And again, I only see one person that did that, but why might someone say that? So again, you may not think it's A. Maybe you agree with Maggie and you're thinking, the answer is C, or you have a different answer, but why might a student say A? And so I'd give students a chance to think about it, and then I'd have them chime in. Because what a lot of times happens is we think our answer and we see our way. We kind of think of in terms of blinders, and we don't open our eyes to the perspectives of others. So it's important to kind of place yourselves in the shoes of other people and to try to see why might they be thinking that. So if someone were to say performance task, someone might say, well, that's the only one maybe potentially where kiddos are typing answers in, or performance task doesn't belong because, hey, that's what we're here for to talk about today. And the rest, I don't think we're talking about as much. So a lot of different things that you could potentially do. When I was creating this, one of the things was I don't always feel that everyone is as understanding in terms of what these components are. So as Maggie had alluded to, performance task and computer adaptive portions, those are the two components of SBAC. In today's session, I'll focus primarily on performance task, but understanding that those are the two parts of what make up SBAC. Now, as far as the practice test and training test, they kind of are lumped together in terms of where you find them in CAASP. However, really big difference, which is the practice test has one offered for each grade level, and those are as close to you're going to see as the real summative SBAC. Whereas the training test kind of lumps things together in grade bands. So it's not necessarily to say, oh, I teach third grade, let me find the training test for third grade. More so it lumps together multiple grade bands. And it's really just what does this SBAC kind of entail? So if I were you, not to say that training tests aren't as great, I just don't think they're as invaluable as some of those other components. So thank you for playing along. Let's go ahead and jump into today's session. So our goals, what are we trying to accomplish in our brief time together? One, we're really trying to deepen everyone's understanding of performance tasks. Like, what are they? Where can I find some sample ones? What could I be doing to help increase those scores? And then, of course, looking at the resources, because I don't want people to feel that you have to go out and find all these things. I've done my best, and we have compiled resources that you have available at your fingertips that if you wanted to use tomorrow, that you could do so. Okay. And I have at the very bottom there, and if you've ever received an email from me, that's just the website link. It's tinyurl.com/math HLPUSD. But essentially, if any email I've sent to you, then you can click on that link and you'll be directed to the math website. And there's a whole web page dedicated purely just to SBAC. And so again, I'd encourage you to check that out if you haven't already done so. We'll look at some of those things later today. So the first question, and I know people are probably wondering, like, what are performance tasks? Maybe you've administered before, so you're fairly knowledgeable, but I know that there are new teachers to our district or even new to the grade level. Maybe you were primarily teaching primary, and this year you're teaching a grade level that is expected to administer SBAC. So what are performance tasks, right? And so we're working from the definition that is given to us, and this is what CAASP says. Essentially, we're talking about a scenario, and it's where students are being able to kind of look at these complex word problems, and they are involving multiple or various different things. So it's not as if to say it's all going to be about fractions or it's all going to be about multiplication and division. It's a variety of skills. Really, the way I like to think of it almost as if you're really just kind of bringing everything together. And I love this way of looking at it. Really, it's taking all of the various things that you're learning throughout the course of a grade level, whether it be not only the content standards, but the practice standards, which we're going to highlight, and it's bringing everything that you're working with together. So that's what performance tasks are. One scenario involving a lot of different things, bringing it all together. So I think if we're going to talk about performance tasks, one of the things that we really have to make sure we understand is how are those comprised? Like, of what? What is it? How is it graded? How is it scored? And that's because not always are we super clear with what is there. So one of the things we talk about when we talk about SBAC is understanding the way that it's broken down. And it's broken down by claims. So there are 4 math claims that they're looking at in addition to the overarching score or overarching claim. But essentially, claim 1, which is your content standards. And that's to say that if you teach third grade, your claim 1 targets or your claim 1 expectations are different than fourth grade because it covers. Claim 1 is all about your standards. Third grade teacher does not have the same standards as a fourth grade teacher and any other grade level, so on and so on. However, when we talk about the claims 2, 3, and 4, and those are the other big component, and I will make sure we clarify that, that is essentially approximately 50% of the SBAC score. So again, when we're talking about how does it kind of boil down, how much value, how much weight is this performance task carrying for my students? Again, it's approximately 50% of their score because claims 2 claims 3, and claims 4 are 50% of the test. And those are the same in terms of the expectations for whether a student is testing in 3rd grade to whether a student is testing in 11th grade in high school. So I want to be very clear with us understanding that there's some continuity, there's some kind of carryover. So it doesn't necessarily matter what grade level you're teaching, what students are expected to do with regards to claims 2, claims 3, and claims 4 is universal. And the way I like to make that connection, because we're always talking about making connections, is looking about our actual math claims, our practice standards. So it's not our content standards, but rather our practice standards. So when we talk about the 8 math practices, really we're tying that directly into the claims 2, 3, and 4. So let's go ahead and get more into those. So when you think about claims 2, 3, and 4, and again, this is 50% of that makeup of that score for SBAC, what we're talking about are these 8 math practice standards. And again, those are universal regardless. And we talk about practice standards, they start in kindergarten and go all the way to 12th grade. So it doesn't matter what grade level you're in, we are all expected to kind of embody and do these things on a regular basis within the mathematics classroom. So one of the big things I talk about is looking at where do things carry over. So in all of these, whether we're talking about claims 2, claim 3, claim 4, you're always kind of mostly looking for, are kids going to be able to, in this case, find precise answers or find the exact answer? Are they going to be able to make sense of problems? And that's one of the big things when I talk about understanding these 3 things, claims 2, claims 3, and claim 4. I always try and find connections, and you're going to find one right away. If you don't ever see that line tying together, claims 2 and claim 4. And that's because there's a lot of similarity between what problem solving is and what modeling and data analysis are. The one of those 3 that kind of stands out separate or different than the rest is claim 3, and that's because it involves our math practice 3, which is to say we're critiquing and the reasoning of others. We're really looking at those arguments. We're looking at those debates, those math fights, if you will. So again, understanding kind of what these are, I think will help us better understand what we're doing every single day, regardless of whether our focus or emphasis is on performance tasks, whatever we're doing within a math lesson. So let's go ahead and move on. So problem solving, it's like big time. What is that, right? What is that something that students struggle with? Because that is oftentimes what a big part of what kiddos have a difficulty. It's not always not necessarily, can I solve this problem? It's understanding what do I need to do? What does the problem want from me? And so I want to make sure we understand kind of what that is. So as far as problem solving, the definition working from CAASP is to say that we're looking at well-posed problems. It is problem-solving strategies, but it's essentially the information is there. I'm not having to go track it down. It's a little bit neater for me, right? One of the big things we talk about in terms of problem solving is it moves beyond just giving you a problem to compute or a problem to solve. You have to kind of reason through what is it asking me to do? What do they want? And that's what problem solving is in its essence. Now, when you talk about what is going to be as far as the content that's on those claim 2 problems is to make sure we understand that it's usually through that grade level, but it could also potentially be from other grade level skills. So let's say, for example, you teach 4th grade. Is it possible to have some 3rd grade concepts on that test? Absolutely, if it's involving problem solving. That's not to say that it's always going to be the case, but it's possible. Now, as far as what is the emphasis in this claim, they lay it out pretty clearly for grades 3 through 5. And that's to say it's going to most likely involve some fractions and or one of the 4 operations. So our multiplication, division, addition, subtraction, those are the components that are at the core of our problem solving. So when I apologize, I see the formatting is a little off there. But essentially, what can you do today to address problem solving as opposed to someday? The first and foremost thing is to be less helpful. And when I tell teachers that, I think sometimes people go, well, what do you mean be less helpful? I know that many of us as teachers, we go into the profession because we want to help students. And so it kind of contradicts big time when we see that term or that frame as be less helpful. And what it means is, how can you help students a little less so that a little bit more of the sense making and a little bit more of their onus is on the student's shoulders as opposed to yours, the teacher. So again, as opposed to, for example, rolling out a problem and telling students, hey, this problem is going to be involving, let's say, some addition because we just talked about adding fractions the other day or last week. You've already given a lot of the problem solving away. There is no sense making to be had. Kids know what they're going to need to do potentially. We want to make sure kids are being able to kind of figure out. I've gone into classrooms and done model lessons, and of course, kids say, hey, if you tell me what I need to do, I can do it, but I'm just not sure what to do. And that's what problem solving is. We want to give kids opportunities for them to make sense of what operation, what it needs to be done. What else can we do? Increase opportunities. When we talk about the achievement level descriptors, which is really to say, is a student going to score a 1, a 2, a 3, or a 4, which 4 being the max score? What does it look like? What do they need to do? And one of the terminology you'll see pop up a lot when you look at those ALDs or achievement level descriptors is to say that students are solving unfamiliar type problems. So it can't always be, hey, we just taught, let's just say we just taught multiplication with fractions. Let me give you a word problem involving multiplication with fractions. If you've done that, then it's not as unfamiliar of a situation. You want to be able to provide them that problem prior to necessarily the instruction or prior to understanding whatever it is that we're doing. And students in that unfamiliar, we want them to score scores of 3 or 4 on the SBAC. They're going to have more experience and opportunities to engage in that. The other thing is when we talk about is routines, right? There's not necessarily a silver bullet where if we do this, automatically kids are going to be better problem solvers, but we can definitely facilitate and foster more sense making. And those are 2 fabulous routines that I've experienced that do just that. The first is 3 Roots Protocol. And if you're unsure as to what that entails, I kind of connect that to our form of close reading with regards to language arts. And that's to say that every time you read the word problem itself, you're focusing on a different thing. First, you're focusing on what it's about. Then you're focusing on the context in terms of kind of what is going on, the quantities, and then eventually what is it being asked of us. So 3 Roots Protocol, just putting a different lens each time you read. And there's a lot of resources that we have on our math website. If you're wanting more, I'd be happy to be able to go over that more. The other one that I like quite a bit is with regards to numberless word problems. And numberless word problems are kind of just the way they sound. You're using word problems with stripping away the quantities. One of the big things we talk about is kids are so quick to identify, here are the numbers, and here's what I need to do with those numbers. And they kind of forget or lose track of, well, what's going on? What is it talking about? What is really at the core or the context of this particular problem? So numberless word problems, and there are already those that exist that are made for you on the math website. If you wanted to pick one up and use it, or if you wanted more information, I'd be happy to share. And not to say those are the only 2 routines, those are just 2 of the ones that I have seen and really kind of had a lot of research to be able to support. This is how effective these 2 strategies can be to be able to promote more problem solving with your students. So communicating reasoning, this is probably one of my favorite in terms of practice standards. And I think it's fabulous because this really gets at the fact that, can we get kids talking more, and can we get them justifying? So if you go back to earlier, one of our opening problems I gave you, both the same, different, and the which one doesn't belong, both of those is moving beyond just a simple, here's my answer. It's as to why is this your answer, or why is this not work, or why do you disagree with so-and-so? So again, when we talk about communicating reasoning, a big chunk of that is really just getting kids talking more in the math classroom. So as far as the definition from CAASP, it's all about kids creating viable arguments and critiquing the reasoning of others. So earlier, if you think about that, which one doesn't belong that we started with earlier, it wasn't just, hey, what do you think is the answer? It's, if someone said this, do you agree with them or do you disagree with them? And making sure we put students into making sense of other people's perspectives. Because again, we talked earlier about those blinders. It happens quite a bit where it's, this is how I see the math. This is how I understand it. I don't need to understand your way. This is my way and I'm producing answers. But this is focusing on moving beyond just getting an answer and making sure we can make sense of the strategies and other potential ways that other peers are going about solving something. In terms of what are the different components, make sure we talk about, it's really focusing on communicating your reasoning. It's just, can I explain what I'm thinking? I'll never forget going into a classroom and having a kiddo say, you know, here, what's your answer? And they give me an answer. And then I say, oh, okay, well, how did you get that answer? Or why is that the answer? I don't know. My brain told me. And so we want to make sure kids are getting opportunities for them to be able to communicate not only how they went about solving something, but why they're doing whatever it is they're doing. So again, really important for kids to move beyond just what is the answer or what do they think the answer is. In terms of what can I do today instead of someday with regards to addressing this particular claim 3, 1, amplify discourse, right? As a teacher, you want to give kids more chances to talk in math. If there's a math lesson and you're the teacher and you're the one doing all of the talking during that particular time, your students are not working on this particular claim, and therefore they're not being set up to be as successful on the SBAC. So questions as a teacher you should be asking of your students. 1, asking why. Why do you think that's the answer? Why do you think that, why did you do this? Do you agree or disagree? Two very basic and simple questions that if you're not already doing a lot of within any particular lesson or any concept you're teaching, please do more so of that. Again, it's not just, hey, so-and-so says this, you said that, great. No, are they right or are they wrong? And tell me why, or prove it to me why, right? We want to make sure we're looking at student work. I know that's one of the big things is sometimes as a teacher, of course, we have our students work on whatever it is they're doing, but I don't always maybe necessarily pull that to the forefront of the class. Okay, pull that work sample to the student, and it could be a wrong strategy or wrong solution. It could be a right one, but we're talking about, do you agree with the way so-and-so solved it? What were they trying to do? Why did they do it this way? So you want to really use what students are producing to kind of guide or facilitate those conversations. You want to look at more opportunities for justification, as we talked about, those 2 routines. And again, these are just 2. That's not necessarily the end all be all, but which one doesn't belong, and same or different. Now, the reason I incorporate those and I'm kind of high on them is because they are low floor, high ceiling tasks. What I used that terminology earlier. And what that means is these provide access to the math that a lot of other types of problems may not do. We talk a lot about the inequities and making sure we want to be able to create more social justice and more of a safe place. We want kiddos to feel as if, you know what, even though I may not have historically been the greatest at math, I can be able to offer up something in the math lesson because there isn't a wrong answer necessarily with either of these 2 routines. Again, there's a lot of available resources of ready-made of these, so you don't have to feel that you have to create your own. Modeling and data analysis. Now, when we think about this, is more so kind of like, it's very much like problem solving. I will say that, but it moves a little bit beyond. You're analyzing data, and that's just that. You're taking it a step further. One of the ways that they look at it is the fact that it's really a bridge. Really, when we talk about claim 4, it's that bridge between what? Between what is in the real world in terms of the actual things that exist out there and the math classroom. So you're connecting those 2. It's really messy. It's not as clear and concise. A student may not have all the information at their fingertips. There might be something missing that they kind of need to put together. So when you're talking about claims 2 and claims 4, again, those are very comparable, both somewhat involving, in a manner of speaking, problem solving, but modeling and data analysis is a little bit messier, a little unclear, a little more work for the students to be able to kind of find these things. When they talk about younger grade levels, one of the big things you'll see is, can students take, let's say, for example, words, and can they take those words and produce them in the form of an equation? Can you basically take it from word form to symbolic form? And that's an important concept. A lot of times you're also looking at models in some regard where kids are going to have to look at a table and they're going to have to be able to pull things out to be able to do that. We talked about what is likely to be embedded inside of our claim 4, and that's going to most likely have missing information, as I alluded to earlier. But a lot of times you're looking at how does it connect to the real world? Again, going back to what can you do today instead of someday, said same thing, be less helpful. The same exact thing as we talked about earlier with regards to problem solving. You want to increase the opportunities for real world problem solving. So taking it beyond just whatever it is in the textbook, how is it something that's relevant that's happening today, potentially? And you want to make sure when possible that you're incorporating some tables, some charts, things where kids have to be able to analyze it and extract the information that's necessary. Details. We just talked a little about the big picture in terms of what fits into performance tasks, right? But if you want to know specifically about the details, we want to make sure we understand kind of how many items could you expect to have on the performance task. What other information do you have for performance tasks? Here's the big picture. If you weren't already aware, is the fact that they're using a modified version of the SBAC this year. So if you were to look at the blueprints, and I could probably put those in the chat, you'll see that it's not the same quantity or number of items that are tested this year in comparison to a normal school year. But as far as the SBAC, they haven't said anything in terms of they're having less items there. So you can expect something close in the ballpark of 4 to 6 questions, right? The initial 2, those are usually, when you look at a performance task, your selected response, AKA multiple choice. So the first 2 questions aren't so much where kids are having to type in or elaborate upon the answer. And really, they're kind of just giving you entry. They're giving you okay, I kind of get my feet wet with whatever's going on in this particular situation before I dig into the meat of this particular performance task. As far as the way it flows, like it says, low to low medium, and then of course, potentially getting harder as the performance task goes on. And then in terms of the scores, most of the items I look at or I've seen in the samples that provided are usually probably 2 points per item, but essentially they're not giving any half points. So it's not as if students are going to get partial credit. It's either they're getting the full 2 points or 1 point or whatever it happens to be, up to 4 points per item. And it just depends on the question being asked. So where can you access performance tasks? Now, I will say my two favorite are inside of CAASP, and we'll highlight and look about those. But you also have some other things available to you. So NCTM, which is the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics, recommends inside mathematics, and that's not necessarily tied to them, but one of the reasons why they like it is because it provides student work samples. Now, these are not digital. These would be in the form of PDF or hard copy. So if you were wanting additional performance task resources, you could visit this website, and then you would be able to download, whether it's 3rd grade, 4th grade, whatever grade level you teach, samples, and those problems have student samples. So we talked earlier about analyzing student work. If you were maybe unsure to pull your own student work samples from your class, you might look at one of those and you could analyze that potentially. We're going to spend the bulk of our time looking at what CAASP has to offer, because I feel like at this juncture, at this point in the year, we don't have, all tons of time to be able to kind of gear up. So we're going to focus on what I would consider to be your best bang for your buck, if you will, with regards to the time that's here. As far as the website, I'll put that in the chat when I give you an opportunity later, but it's inside mathematics. NCTM is the actual governing body. That's the National Council for Teachers of Mathematics. So that's the group that recommends this. But again, inside mathematics is the website. And I think I have the link right there. Let me go ahead and grab it, and I'll put it right now. Give me a minute. Again, that's inside mathematics, but I would say definitely my recommendation would be that'd be after you've exhausted everything that is available in CAASP, only because I feel that that probably is a better comparable in terms of what students are exactly expected to see. All right, so as far as the CAASP, let's look at some of those examples. So we're going to focus on those two, which one is the practice test. There is a performance task that is available there. And then you also have the performance tasks available in your IABs. Now, I wrote IABs, but I want to be very, very clear. It is not a block. It is actually a component of the ICA, which is the interim comprehensive assessment. And if you wanted to kind of give your students the most closest thing they're going to see to the SBAC, you might give that. But you have the ability to give the performance task just simply in the performance task as its own. And again, it's kind of lumped in together with those IABs. So we're going to look at both of those right now. So give me a moment to go ahead and I'll end this screen share. And then I'm going to redirect us over to CAASP. So if you're not familiar with the CAASP website, give me a minute to pull it up, and then we'll see all the many things you have available there. So as far as CAASP, this is your site. This is where you would go to locate quite a bit of things, but specifically we're talking about both the practice tests and training tests. So I'm going to start by looking right here where I say the practice and training tests. And earlier, if you joined us late, we talked about the fact that the practice and training tests, while all compiled in the same location, are not the same thing. When you look at what the training test has available to you, it's very limited. It's not necessarily what I would really recommend, but more so the practice tests are. You will need your Tom's login to get further. Students should be able to log in without having to do that because they are available to all and everyone. So once you're here, you're going to select your grade. So this example, we'll just say 3rd grade as an example. And while I'm pulling this up, one of the things I was speaking to another colleague today, and we kind of realized, hey, if you teach 5th grade, guess what? This is the first time your kiddos are taking the SBAC. So when I think about usually a normal SBAC year, obviously 3rd graders, that's the first year that they take the SBAC. But because of a pandemic and because what's transpired over the course of the last 2 years, our 5th graders are taking the SBAC this year for the very first time. So when we talk about, hey, this is new for you, for our students, for all of them, 3rd, 4th, and 5th at the very least, this is new for them. And if you think about any other grade levels, they may have taken it. Those 6th graders, yeah, they took it back in 3rd grade, which is mind-blowing when you really think about it. So here I am, I'm gonna select my grade as an example, 3rd grade, and this is what you're given. So, okay, so it tells me, I see all of the tests. This isn't the practice and training test. This redirected with my Tom's login to the IABs. So I guess we'll start there, and then we'll look at the practice and training test next. So you have all of the different blocks, but we're focusing on the performance task. Okay, so if I scroll down, I can see ELA performance task, and then I also see the math performance task. So I'm going to open up the math one because that's what we're here to focus on. It's going to prompt me to kind of go through this process, the same that students would do as if they're taking it. I could play the sound, just a little protocol in place that make us go through. I always tell students when we practice things like this, you really don't have to listen to anything, even though the test prompts you as such. So when you're here, you can see this is the way that it's going to be looking for them exactly when they take the summative SBAC. So on the left-hand side, you have the information, right? What they need to be able to need to answer these questions. Then on the right-hand column, you see each of the questions themselves. So I think it's really important for kiddos to be able to see this structure, this layout, if you will. We talk a lot about in reading about text structure, same idea, it's the way the problem is presented to them. So on the left-hand side, that information that they have the ability to scroll through, and then they have on the right-hand side, the answers they're going through. And then of course you can see, so up here, we talked a little bit about how it's warming them up, really, if you will, before it progresses any further. I'm not gonna go item by item, but I wanna make sure you understand that you as the teacher could use this block of the performance task with your students, and you could essentially have them take it as if it were really there, and then you as the teacher would need to score it because of the fact that there are constructor responses. The computer system wouldn't grade it for yourself. So if you elected to go that step, by all means, but if you just wanted to at least give your kiddos the exposure to it to be able to review maybe a whole group or what have you, you could do that as well. I think there's a lot of power in addition to that to being able to show it whole group and then being able to give the problem. And so in addition to them taking it individually, you might just have a conversation centered around, what do we need to be able to do this? Let's talk about some different strategies you might have used. So again, you do have the ability as a class to project this onto your with your projector and then have a whole group conversation if you wanted to about the block. Or you could assign it just like you had to do for the district interims to be able to have your students independently work on this on the computer themselves. So again, this is the interim assessment block. This is the performance task that CAASP offers. So I'm going to stop the share and I'm going to go back into the performance task that I tried to initially, which is looking at the practice and training tests. Give me a second. All right, here, let's try this again. So when you get into that practice and training test, again, same location, I was on CAASP, and from CAASP, I clicked on practice and training tests. I didn't need a login. I went to this green little tag. And once I got there, this is the screen that it prompts me. So again, if you're wanting your students and you might encourage them potentially on their own, maybe it's homework as the test gets closer. If you're not having time in class to be able to do this, they can do this without any login credentials. It obviously tells you guest user and guest session. One of the other things that maybe you weren't aware about, if you wanted your kiddos to practice entering in their login credentials, if you toggle this guest user off, now it's going to prompt just like it will in the summative SBAC students to be able to enter in both their first name as well as their SSID. Small little practice, but hey, if you want to really gear it up to this is what it's going to be like, you might take that extra step. I'm going to leave it for guest user on, and I'm going to go ahead and click sign in. Same thing, we're going to be able to select our grade level. In this sample, we'll look at 4th grade this time around. And now that I'm clicking on 4th grade, I can see here is what I have. I have available to me the practice tests, but I also have the training tests. And you can see those training tests are lumped by a grade bands. So we're looking at grades 3 through 5. And it's really just exposure to how does it look for students. But that training test performance task to me is very similar or comparable to what we just saw for the interim assessment block. So again, talking about the practice tests, and we're looking at the math. Let's go ahead and find that math one. Right here, the math performance task. This is the screen that students are going to see, and they will see it the same for other assessments. I'm going to go ahead and say, select. This is the test I want my students to do. Same process and protocol in place. If you don't have headphones and you're in the classroom and you're wanting to do this, I'm telling you right now, you don't need the sound, although it does require you to go through that. I'm gonna click begin test now. And here's where students are going to be able to interact with the same exact, not the exact problem, but same exact structure of how it's going to be presented. Now, one of the big differences between the practice test and the IAB is here, however a student performs, you're never going to see their responses unless you're looking over their shoulder, right? You're not going to have to grade this. You're not going to see their performance. But if you administer the block, you as the teacher, while you do have to grade those constructor responses, you have at least a history, you have it preserved, if you will, how they answered, how they responded. We talked earlier about showing student work. Maybe you did it independently. And of course, without putting anyone on blast, you could keep it anonymous and pull up a student work sample and just analyze, here's what a student solved. We already all did this whole group, but let's look at what one person in our class answered. And we can talk about, either what they did well, what they could have improved upon. So again, same idea. One of the things that's here about with regards to the practice test is they, in addition to providing you here this resource, they also, SBAC has given us kind of a PDF of what that looks like. Okay, so let me go ahead and end my share, and hopefully you at least understand two fabulous places that you could pull if you haven't already with both the IAB or the block version of the performance task, and right here, which again was the practice and training test location, specifically it's the practice test. See.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So I've been doing the let's say IABs and the practices as well, but IAB, can I do unlimited amount? And do I choose standardized or non-standardized? Does that matter which one I choose?
Sure, yeah. So I think it's fabulous, first of all, that you're using the interim assessment blocks. Great job. As far as can you use those unlimited? Absolutely. It does say 1 through 99, but I don't think that I've experienced any person who's exceeded the limit. So yes, you can continue to use the same exact test if you deemed it valuable, right, for your students. And then as far as the form that you do, typically we suggest that you do non-standardized. Standardized would be more so for a district common assessment or something that we wanted preserved. And the idea being that when you use standardized, the data can stay after the school year is over. Whereas if it's non-standardized, it's kind of more like a practice test, if you will, and you do it as many times as you want. But when the school year is over, the data is going to be kind of erased or gone. It's not necessarily preserved.
So I can still see the results if it's non-standardized. Because if I do the practice test, what happens? Like we're practicing the performance task, and they're like, "Oh, this kid is not saved because it's this guest sign in." So maybe that would be helpful.
Thank you for making sure we communicate that distinction even further, which is to say, if you are doing the practice tests, none of the data is preserved. So if you started, let's say today, and then you wanted to go back tomorrow to pick up where you left off, you're not going to be able to see what they had answered previously because it's not saved. It doesn't know who you are. So if you want kiddos to be able to solve it in chunks or in blocks, then that would be more so the IABs. And again, if you were wanting to see how they performed outside of looking over their shoulder for every question, which I know realistically you can't do, then it would be the block. Now, is there value still in doing the practice test? Absolutely. And in fact, one of the resources I've compiled is going to just say that, like, if we didn't want kids to take it on the computer, or maybe we wanted to be able to do a whole group, here's something you might choose to do. So thank you for asking, and thank you again for doing those IABs with your kiddos. Resources that are available to you. The math website has compiled quite a bit of things. And one of the big things I think that I really hope that more teachers use that I created last year was something that's really ready-made for you, a PowerPoint that puts students in the lens of a person actually grading. So a lot of times what happens is students understand, okay, I know how to navigate. I understand there's a left-hand side with the information and the right side with the questions. I've done sample performance tasks, but they don't necessarily know what is SBAC looking for. One of the things I try and tell students is with most of the things you're doing on SBAC, a computer is grading. It doesn't know who you are. It just grades based on the system and the programming. Whereas when you're looking at performance tasks, there's a physical, individual, real life person looking at every single question that you answered, and based on that, they're giving you a score. So if you're saying, okay, there's a person grading my stuff, again, they don't know who you are. They don't know everything there is to know. They're only looking at what you write for that one question. So what do you need to produce to be able to get the best score possible? And so while we will look at what is available on the math website, I really want to show you just a preview of this, what I would consider really impactful resource that you might choose to use with your kiddos. So it puts kiddos kind of in the lens of a grader. And kids are harsh, right? They like to be able to kind of, you did this or you didn't do that. When it comes to their own stuff, they may have a little bit of a easier way of grading themselves, right? So here is a sample. This is actually from the performance task practice test. So what I did is I screenshot and put this into a slideshow so that you can have your kids kind of take on the role, if you will, of a grader. So here's the question. I'm going to read it and then understand that this is something I would do with students. I would suggest after they've actually had a chance to solve it on their own. So first, students solve this problem or they do this particular performance task. Again, it comes from the practice test. And after they've done it on their own, then we evaluate and get the role of a grader, the role of a teacher, so that they can better see, here's what I need to do to maximize my score. So the problem is you need 120 pieces of chalk for art day. Your teacher has 6 boxes of chalk. Each box has 18 pieces of chalk. Is this enough chalk for art day? So a lot of information coming their way. And then it says, explain the steps you use to figure this out. So there's all of what is given to the student. Let's look at what one student answered. So I show this to my students. We talk about what do they need, right? So in order for them to get the best score, some things that we want to make sure we're being mindful of. Did the individual or the student answering, did they use because, right? Did they use words and numbers? And did they answer all the parts? Because a lot of times what happens is they answer part of the question fabulously, but they skip the other part. Consequently, their score is automatically reduced. So those are things that I try to drill home with any group of kiddos that I work with, making sure we're addressing these 3 components. And now we get into the role of the grader. Score for this particular item is maximum 2. So it either can be a 0, a 1, or a 2 based on the response that we're seeing. So it says from a student, again, this is exactly what a student wrote. First, you add 18 plus 18 plus 18 plus 18 plus 18, which equals 108. Then you look at what you need, and it is not enough. So usually either I do it with whiteboards or even have kids with their fingers, give a chance for them to make sense. And then I ask them, what do you think this student deserves? You don't know who he was or who she was or who they are, but we see their answer, just like a teacher is going to see or an adult is going to see when they grade your writing for the performance task. So what do you think they deserved? So I give you a chance a minute, and then I'll ask the class again. Sometimes I've done it with whiteboards. They write it on their whiteboard. They show it to me. Sometimes I've just said, go ahead and show up your fingers when I ask you to. And kids are really engaged because they love being able to be critics and they like to be able to judge and critique the reason of others. Sometimes they're harsh and they're going to say everything is a 0, but we go back to justification in math. You think it's a whatever you say. Why do you think it's whatever you say? And we have that conversation and I'll let them talk about it. And then eventually I show them, okay, this one actually earned a 1. Why? And then some of the kids, I knew what I was right. Why did they get a 1? SBAC provides rationale for each of their responses. So in this case, they correctly calculated, so the computation's fine, right? However, they didn't really elaborate or expand upon why it was not enough. They didn't tie the fact that they needed this many and 108 is less than what they actually needed. So they have to be very clear. Now, from students' perspective, they might be like, wow, they did all that work and they still didn't get the max points possible. Is it better than, of course, the 0? Absolutely. But it's not just how well did I do, but how can I make mine better, right? We talk a lot about revising in math and revising in writing. We're always trying to make things better. So now we'll look at a different work sample. Now, if I were doing this in the classroom with students, whole group, I probably, after I let them answer the questions by themselves, and then we've had a chance to grade this item, then I would say, oh, go back to your writing. Take a look at what you produced. Grade yourself for a moment. Do you think you deserve a 0, a 1, or 2 for your answer? And whatever grade they gave it, fine. How could you make yours even better? Right? Now they've already seen some other samples, and now they're being able to go back and revise and improve upon their own. So I think that's a really important distinction. Don't just have them do this. Instead, have them do the actual performance task first, and then grade some student samples. Now we have a better idea of what's expected of us, how I score a 2. Let me go ahead and try and revise my own. So we're going to look at one more student sample. Says the answer is there is not enough chalk for chalk day or chalk station because 18 times 6 equals 108, and you need 12 more pieces of chalk. And same thing, I give my students an opportunity, whether it be with whiteboards or with their fingers. What do you think this student scored? And then I let them go ahead and give me their score. And then after a while, talk about why. Why do you think it's whatever you think it is? And here's what SBAC has to say. It's 2, and we talk about why. So again, do the performance task first with your students. As a follow-up, have them work on being able to score other people's writing and then go back to their own to revise. And I think this is probably the most powerful, because not only are they engaging in it, exposure to it, doing it, but they're also getting a chance to see how can I maximize my score to make my performance task in this particular sample, this item, an even better score. So again, this is as a PowerPoint or as a slideshow, something you could play with your students. And it, again, is taking from the practice test SBAC. And I have it in nice, neat format for each of the constructed responses. And there's a handful. I'm just showed you 2 student samples. I think there's probably like at least 4 for each of the various answers. So you could pick and choose, but I think it's a nice balance for kids to see what does it look like for a 0 or a 1 or a 2. And again, they may be very harsh and say whatever they think, but it always goes back to the why and how can you make yours better. I'm going to stop that screen share, or at least exit out of that, and then go real fast to what are some things here as we wind down that is also available on the math website. So let me go ahead and click on that. All right, open a new tab a bit faster. So once you're here on the math website, what I really hope that you would do, at least because we're talking about SBAC, is to look at what is available to you for SBAC. So if you came to the SBAC support, in addition to having a lot of sample items, which we're not going to highlight today because today's session is specifically geared towards performance task, we're going to see where is the performance task stuff available to you. So if I scroll down, once I clicked on the SBAC resources, I'm going to look at where it says SBAC samples, and then find your individual grade. So if let's say, for example, that we're 5th grade, I open 5th grade, and I told you that PowerPoint presentation that I just kind of really quickly showed you a preview to, it's there, performance tasks. And this is placing our students in the role, and it really kind of goes through. So this is something that I hope that you could just pick up and use it whenever you're ready, where it talks about, what are performance tasks for students? Because again, all of our kiddos are new to this. We talk about let's try one. Talks about how you go through that performance task. Where do you find it? I mean, it's very thorough. So this is, again, I created it because I want to make sure you have something that you could just pick up and use without having to kind of figure it out. And then eventually, as I talked about, talks about what are those 3 components to maximize your score. And then you see the work samples that are provided. So it's always here's what students said. And then eventually, here's the actual solution that SBAC gave. And here's why my rationale. So I'll stop that. Now here inside that same location, you have some additional ones. This is another performance text, and this is in a print. So this is not a digital component, but this is another one that was used previously. And so you can see here's the information. And then of course, here are the questions. So this is something you potentially could photocopy or run off for your kiddos and have them work on this. So is this the same exact as the other 2 locations I mentioned? No, because it's not digital, but you're still practicing on those performance task structures. And then the one last thing in most of the grade levels I have is just some other samples. Now, this is not one whole performance task in its entirety. So you're not going to see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 questions all about that one scenario, but more so these are just kind of a sample. So you can kind of do it almost like a problem of the day or a whole group activity related to the one prompt. And same thing, these are not digital. These are PDF or at least pull up in terms of a hard copy. So for example, let me just find one right here. So this is a 2-parter, part A and a part B. It gives you some information right here. Mrs. Laurel sells orange juice, and then it tells students what they need to do for part A, and then here's what they need to do for part B. So again, I would say if you are limited and pressed for time, which I know that most teachers are, the first and foremost place you would do is check out those interim assessment block performance tasks and check out those practice test assessments or those practice test performance tasks. And then if you wanted to take a step further, earlier, I mentioned the Inside Mathematics as a resource. I shared that link. You could do that, or you could do any one of these. But first and foremost, those 2 CAASP ones. Now, we do have some available to us in tools for teachers, which is new platform as of last year. And this is SBAC as well. But because we're pressed for time, I'm not going to show that. If you were wanting more information in regards to tools for teachers, I'd be happy to share that with you. And I will say tools for teachers does require a Tom's login. So you will need to log in just like we did for some of these other resources to be able to access those. All right, so I went through what are some of the resources available to you. I went through kind of where you could find some of those things. Let's go ahead and wrap up. Let me a second to finish up where we talked about. And again, brief session, our goals, what we were trying to accomplish. We're trying to deepen our understanding of what are performance tasks. And we also wanted to look at what are some of the resources available to you. So I hope that of our brief time together, you're able to get those two things. I will open it up for some questions, and then I'll let you get an opportunity to be able to talk about what really you took out of our time together. But first, questions. So does anyone have anything that they would like to unmute and ask? I know there was a few that were already asked. Want to make sure it's pointing it to you. Let me see the chat. Unmute away. I see a question in the chat. Someone asked, thank you for asking, the difference between the IABs and the FIABs. So the IABs, again, first of all, education is chock full of acronyms. So sorry, it's not my fault, I promise. But the IABs are the interim assessment blocks, and the FIABs are the focus interim assessment blocks. What does that mean? The FIAB is really specific to very few concepts, whereas the IAB may be involving multiple. So when you think about your math standards, or any standards for that matter, you could always say, oh, is it just like a couple different targets or a couple different clusters, or is it a chunk of stuff? Now, every block is just that, a chunk of stuff, but the FIABs are more focused. Really what they say is limited to 2 to 3 targets. And if it's exceeding that, then of course it's going to be an IAB.
So on top of that, would that be helpful then? FIAB, is that helpful for the SBAC prep?
Absolutely. Any of the IAB/FIABs are helpful to your kiddos, but I would say if you're talking about performance tasks, which today's focus was, I would say that would be those other 2 resources that I mentioned to you. The FIABs, while they are helpful, and I would encourage teachers to use them, are not as helpful with regards to the performance tasks. They are helpful more so to the computer adaptive portion of the test, which I'm hoping that we'll probably have a follow-up session and offer that. So if any of you are interested, I'll post some information. Once this link or this recording is finished, I'll send that out. Any more questions? All right, so then I will ask, and it's just a small ask, which is to say if you could just chime in with what is your greatest takeaway. I have for us, it's called a Jamboard. So really all you're doing is just kind of looking at and typing in what is your greatest takeaway. So let me go ahead and end my share. Again, thank you so much for joining. This will be recorded, or it was recorded rather, and I will share that link with any and all people that were there. So if you have a colleague and you felt like, you know what, hey, it was helpful, share it with them, or at least tell them to take a look. If there's a component specifically, you know, right when he talks about this, by all means, let them know. We appreciate it. Sometimes they dub it, tag a teacher and let them know. And thank you to those of you taking the time to post something there in the Jamboard. Kind of think of us our parking lot, but virtual version. If you're wanting more, please don't hesitate to shoot an email. I'd be happy to either meet with you or at least maybe come potentially work with your students. I know that, you know, there's a lot on your shoulders. And so while I did compile resources available to you, I don't want you to feel that, you know, I just made it and forget it. I want to make sure if you'd like, right, that's for me to be able to come in and work with your kiddos or PLC with you and go over some things. Happy to help in any way that you see fit. So thank you so much for everyone for taking the time. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And like I said, if you have anything else related to performance tasks or anything really math, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you so much again.